students, my name is Ayla Kugona, your facilitator for this course LIS 212, Indigenous Knowledge Management. Last week we had a discussion on the types and components of Indigenous Knowledge Management. So for today's class, we are going to discuss the nature and features of Indigenous knowledge. So let's head to class. You are all welcome to LIS 212, Indigenous Knowledge Management class. I am your facilitator, Ailaku Ugonna, and for today, we will be discussing briefly the nature and features of Indigenous knowledge. Remember last lesson, we discussed the types and components of Indigenous knowledge. At the end of today's class, we should be able to differentiate between Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. We also should be able to state the nature and features of Indigenous knowledge and be able to list the characteristics of Indigenous knowledge. We have two types of knowledge: the Indigenous knowledge and the formal, or you can say the Western knowledge. And we are told at the beginning of this course that Indigenous knowledge is the traditional knowledge which is unique to a locality or community. So the Western knowledge is referred to as the scientific knowledge. The Indigenous knowledge is usually passed down orally from one generation, usually the elders, to another generation, the younger ones. It is more holistic and it considers the mind and is based on experiences of the individuals in the community or their empirical observation. And Indigenous knowledge is generated and held by the users themselves, while the Western knowledge or the formal knowledge would be seen as being quantitative in nature. It is rational and supposedly value free because it's based more on theories. It is generated by specialists. But before we continue with the class, let us attempt the first class activity for today's lesson. We are still on the differences between the Indigenous knowledge and the Western knowledge. Definitely the two knowledge are different from each other in terms of ways of acquisition, mode of preservation, and transmission. Indigenous knowledge is holistic in mode of approach, but in formal or Western knowledge, it is more compartmental. Indigenous knowledge is communicated orally from one person to another, but in Western knowledge, it is documented or written. And how is indigenous knowledge taught? It's through observation and experience. But in Western knowledge, it's through lectures like we are having now and theories. Indigenous knowledge is spiritual, social value, and formal knowledge is based on theory and is regarded to be value free. Characteristics of indigenous knowledge. It is generated within communities. It is oral and rural in nature. It is also location and culture specific. It is not systematically documented. It concerns itself with critical issues of human and animal life, such as natural resources management, human and animal life, primary production. It is dynamic and is based on innovation, adaptation, and experimentation. But before we end this class, let us answer the second class activity. And as usual, I will be expecting your answers and responses to be sent to my email. So for today's class activity, please send in your discussion to my email. So far for today, we have learned the difference between the indigenous knowledge and the formal knowledge, the nature and features of indigenous knowledge. We also discussed it, and we're able to list the characteristics of indigenous knowledge. I will also ask you, please, to still refer back to your course material on Indigenous Knowledge Management, LIS 212, and still read up on this topic. If you still have questions or challenges in this course, please send me an email, vilaku@now.edu.ng. My name is Ailaku Gona. I am your facilitator for this course. Till the next class. Bye.